Welcome to Mindshift, I'm Brandon, and today is another Sunday video. I think this one's going to be pretty unique. The topic today is Satanic Hiddenness as opposed to Divine Hiddenness. I had a subscriber named Tim who suggested I talk about it, and I loved the concept. If you don't know about the problem of divine hiddenness, first of all, I'd encourage you to watch this video where I react to Mike Winger talking about his defense of it. But in short, divine hiddenness is just what it sounds like. Where is God? Why is it so hard for us to know that we're hearing from God, to see God physically show up and to work and to reveal himself to us if his word says that's what he wants to do, will do, and has done in the past? That and the problem of suffering or evil are the two biggest blocks for me to the Christian religion, outside of the incorrectness of the Bible, that is. So when Tim said satanic hiddenness, I kind of had to think about that for a minute. It's kind of the opposite of the God story. So we see in the Old Testament a very physical God who walks with Adam, who meets with Abraham and Moses, who physically leads his people through 40 years of wandering. And if you've been following our secular Bible study series, we just covered Joshua, where this God is literally picking up physical rocks from heaven and throwing them down to kill more enemies than Joshua and his warriors even did. We see God stick with us through the whole Old Testament, and then we see Jesus in the New Testament. Jesus ascends into heaven and poof, no more physical God. Satan, on the other hand, has quite the opposite story. We see Satan in the Old Testament really not at all. We're going to get to verses about Satan here in a second, but depending on the translations that you look at, there is a snake, there is an accuser, like we see in Job, but the idea of there being an actual enemy of God, a specific and separate deity, etc., is confusing at best and minimally mentioned. But in the New Testament, all of a sudden, we've got Satan and his demons everywhere. Jesus is casting them out. Peter, John, Paul, everyone is talking about being on guard, the spiritual warfare, the reality of these evil spirits, the battle of which we must conquer them, etc. It is everywhere, as well as the concept of hell, which we also don't have in the Old Testament other than Sheol and a few other references. So how strange for Satan and his demons to come on the scene at the time of Jesus and then also disappear at Jesus' ascension. Now, there's two arguments that I can see coming from the Christian side, but I think we'll handle those at the end of the video. Where I want to start is let's look at the verses in the Bible about Satan, and then the meat of today's video is going to be going through all of the excuses that we have for God's divine hiddenness, like, well, he needs to be hidden to test our faith and he doesn't want to interrupt our free will, and see, do those apply to Satan? And if not, why would Satan remain hidden? And if Satan is so hidden and has no good reason to be hidden, like the horrendous excuses again from the Christian apologist about God's hiddenness, then maybe it points to something greater, like that he's not real, that the Bible's not true, and that there is no counterpart up in heaven, aka Yahweh. I don't know exactly how this is all going to go, but I assume it will at least be something new and novel for us to think about here on the channel. So let's get started with the verses about Satan. Okay, so again, in the Old Testament, we have just a few verses. We have Genesis 3, 1-5, which is when the serpent tempts Eve. The only reason we've associated that with Satan is because in the New Testament, when they're crazy about talking about Satan, they reference back to this. But in its own context, not so much. In Job 1, starting at verse 6, we see the accuser, is the Hebrew word, go before God, and he's going back and forth from heaven to somewhere else. He's on the earth. He's physically showing up and dealing with Job. In Zechariah 3, 1-2, we get again the accuser. Now, some modern translations have just flat out said Satan, but it's the same word as Job with accuser, which certain scholars believe just to be an angel of the Lord who worked in kind of a lawyer fashion, bringing people for justice before the Lord. But we see him accuse the high priest Joshua before God here. Seems like a weird thing for the Satan that we envision to be doing. There's some other iterations like in Isaiah 14 where it's inferenced, especially in comparison with what we see in the New Testament, that the being here is Satan, but again, not very clearly defined. And that's like really about it. Again, this is not really part of the Old Testament here. So why did it change? Well, that's a question for another day, but I do want to talk about the fact that it did indeed change and give you just a few quick ideas of what the New Testament says about this different version of Satan. In Matthew 4, we have Satan tempting Jesus. In Matthew 12, Jesus himself talks about Satan and his kingdom being divided. In Luke 10, Jesus talks about how he saw Satan fall from heaven, thus where we get some of the references and inferences for Isaiah. In Luke 22, Jesus is telling Peter that Satan has demanded that he sift him like wheat. In John, Jesus identifies the devil as the father of lies. In Acts, Ananias blames Satan for deceiving him to lie against the Holy Spirit. In 2 Corinthians 11, Paul mentions Satan Satan disguising himself as an angel of light. We're going to come back to that one in a little bit. In Ephesians 2, Satan is referred to as the ruler of the kingdom of the air. In Ephesians 4, Paul warns believers against Satan and the foothold that he can get. And in 1 Peter 5, Peter warns the believers that Satan crawls around like a lion looking to devour. And it goes on and on and on. And that's just Satan and Lucifer. That has nothing to do with all of the demons that Jesus cast out and all of the unclean spirits that are mentioned, etc. Like, it is chock full of a belief in a physical enemy of God that can physically and mentally and spiritually torment and interfere in your relationship, in your spiritual development, etc. So we've established Satan within the text, but even what I think gives more credence to the fact that in the Old Testament it was a different entity or an accuser, or they hadn't fully developed the idea of Satan yet, is that we don't see Satan doing what we would expect him to be doing, right? In the New Testament, he's there literally battling Jesus, trying to tempt him, trying to get him to give in and sin, offering him the kingdom of earth because he owns the kingdom of earth. He is tricking believers. He is masquerading himself as an angel of light to deceive. He is roaring around, that one's metaphorically like a lion, etc., but he is trying to be divisive. I think the best time to do that would have been in the Old Testament. Can you imagine if Satan was around to mess with Moses or mess with Joshua or help the Canaanites win a victory, etc.? We see none of that. Nothing at all like it whatsoever. So, confusion there, but where is Satan now? Why would he be hiding? He doesn't have any of the same motivations as God. In fact, he has almost the opposite motivation that God has for everything. So let's go through the Christian reasons why God would be hidden and try to apply them to Satan and see how it stacks up. The first one is to test our faith. Right? God isn't showing up, isn't answering prayer, isn't responding to our call, etc. And when we feel like we can't find God, what do the Christian apologists tell us? It's because God wants to test our faith. I heard this personally quite a bit as a believer when I had issues. Oh, it's just a trial period. God is testing your faith. Stay strong. God will reveal himself if you are earnest and you seek him sincerely enough. Would Satan need to test our faith? No. And what is Satan's goal, by the way? Right? Maybe we should start there. What is Satan's goal? He left heaven. He took a third of the angels with him, supposedly. He knows he's going to lose in the end, so his goal is to cause as much destruction and damnation and steal as many souls as possible, so the story goes. So no reason to test our faith. He doesn't need faith. He doesn't run off of faith. He just wants to interfere with you. And from the creation myth, if we're going to believe that that same entity is indeed Satan and that he fell and that it was a pride issue, right? We always hear this, that he wanted to be godlike, that he was jealous of God. Well, the best way to compensate for losing heaven and losing eternity and being damned to hell yourself if you're Satan would be at least to still get that praise and recognition and worship that you desired. He's not going to get that from staying hidden. He's going to get that from showing up and making deals and having people do wrong, etc. Like, not thinking about it from a biblical perspective, but from Satan's perspective, there's just no reason to remain hidden, except maybe two excuses. So let's go ahead and talk about those now, and then we'll get back to our list. The first one is that Christians would say Satan wouldn't want to show up because then people will know he's real. And if people know he's real, then they'll also know that God is real, and they might choose the winning side, God. This doesn't make sense to me for many, many reasons. First of all, let's look at when Satan took a third of heaven's host with him, and these are angels that were in the presence of God. Did he try to convince them that God wasn't real? No. He tried to convince them that it would be better to be with him. And he did. And those were angels who knew God for sure. Satan's power of persuasion is obviously very good here. And also, if that were the case, why ever talk about Satan? Why did Jesus reference Satan? Why did he allow this to be in the Bible? Why ever give us an idea about this enemy? If God is okay with you knowing about Satan, why wouldn't Satan be okay with you knowing about Satan? So for those two reasons, I don't think that argument stands. And the second reason is going to be from kind of the evangelicals and the fundamentalists that are going to say, what are you talking about? Satan is here. Satan's everywhere. I deal with him every day. I've got demons doing this to me and demons doing that to me. But only in your bedroom at night by yourself with no one else around, and they never show up on videotape or anything like that, right? If Satan's real and he doesn't mind showing up physically like he did with Job, or like when he hung out with Jesus in the desert, etc., then why does he hide himself to this degree? So I'll even give you that. You want to believe that what you're experiencing is demonic possession and Satan tempting you and all of these things, fine, but why so secretive? Why so hidden? Why isn't he chilling at the office with you, messing with you? I know this sounds silly, but if you really believe Satan is who he said he is, that he sat there and convinced a third of the heavenly host to follow him to the pits of hell just for the temporary pleasure of owning earth. What would make him stay hidden? We know God doesn't make him stay hidden. God has given him command over the earth according to the scriptures. We see God thinking it's just a game. Place a bet. Let's see how the humans do with you physically interacting. He didn't staple Satan's hands to the grounds of hell to make sure he couldn't come up here. Satan has free reign. So which is it? You either believe as a progressive Christian that Satan isn't necessarily real and that hell's not necessarily real, or there's an explanation for this, or there are demonic spirits, but they're invisible. It's a spiritual warfare going on around us. But the Bible doesn't say just that. It says a lot of physical things. Why disregard those? And if you're a fundamentalist who believes that Satan does physically show up and his devils and demons do physically show up in your life, which I've heard story after story after story, why only ever in this very secretive fashion that you can never prove? Satan's hiddenness is really starting to look like a problem to me, and I'm not seeing any good excuses for it. So we went a bit out of order, but we already talked about one of God's reasonings for his divine hiddenness would be to test our faith. The second one might be because he needed to give us free will, and if he showed up, it would simply be too obvious to us, and it would rob us of our free choice to follow him by faith. That's problematic for a billion reasons all on its own, but we can't apply that one to Satan either. Satan doesn't care about corrupting our free will. By the very definition of who he is and what his goal is, all he wants to do is affect our will. All he wants to do is interrupt our relationship with Jesus. All he wants to do is cause doubts and confusion. The very best thing he could do would be to interfere with our will. He doesn't have that same standard of God. We see Paul telling us that Satan masquerades as an angel of light. Wouldn't it make more sense for Satan to be present on earth all the time, confusing people, leading people astray, sometimes being the satanic route and helping people do bad things and helping bad people accomplish more against God, and then other times dressing up as the angel of light or anything else if we believe the powers that this Satan has to mess with us, to confuse Christians, to lead people astray? So he doesn't care about testing our faith. He doesn't care about interrupting our will. The third excuse we get from the Christians about divine hiddenness is that we weren't sincere enough. We weren't seeking God out enough. We didn't believe earnestly enough. Does that apply to Satan? I don't think so. Satan doesn't care about our level of belief. He can work with any of it. That means that every Christian that believes in Satan should have no problem messing with. It doesn't help them believe in God anymore. He can simply just mess with them. He can tempt them more. He can introduce them to sin. He can show up at their house. He can physically harm them according to the Bible. Why is he not just killing everyone he can before they have a chance to believe? Wouldn't that make the most sense if you're Satan? If the only way that people can go to heaven and be with God and be saved is if they have a chance to believe in Jesus before they die for their salvation, then affecting their ability to do so by either killing them or destroying them mentally or giving them a disease or any of these other things that Christians have no problem with Satan being able to do, right? We even blame most mental illnesses from a Christian perspective in many circles, about 40% of Americans, on unclean spirits. That can definitely get in the way with a sincere belief in God. So maybe Satan should be doing that stuff. There's just no reason for Satan not to be so very active all the time, not just invisibly behind the scenes with demons and temptation, but physically with physical harm and a physical reality. This is his playground. We should see him playing in it, and we don't. So I know this has been short. I don't have that much more to say. There is going to be a part 2 where we talk about the history of Satan and the evolution of Satan and the narratives like the Inferno and Paradise Lost that have given a lot more character to Satan that a lot of people think is from the Bible. That's not. It's just fan fiction literature at its finest. And we'll describe that history in great detail. So look forward to that on a part 2. But this is what I would end with for part 1 here. Some Christians just aren't going to care. They're either going to believe that Satan is indeed real and they've had encounters with him, and so what I'm saying falls flat, fine. Or they're going to say that Satan isn't a big deal. He's not necessary. Him and hell, they don't matter, and that they can find scriptural references to get around them. I don't see how you can do that. What are you being saved from by believing in Jesus? What did Jesus die on the cross for? He took the keys to death and Hades. Why did Jesus spend all that time warning us that it would literally, look at the context, literally be better to cut off our arms that we don't sin and enter into heaven with no arms than it would be to keep the arms, keep sinning, and go to hell? I understand and am very aware of all of the interpretations that the modern Christian is now really excited about how there may not indeed be a hell. I don't agree with them. I think they're stretches. I think it's a way for the modern Christian whose morality has caught up way past where the morality of the Bible was to say, I no longer have to justify this horrible thing that there is infinite torture for finite crimes, because God doesn't really do that. There's not really hell. It's just oblivion or some form of universalism or all of the other excuses that seem to just go against exactly what Jesus is saying. It's amazing the credence that we will give to the Old Testament. But when Jesus is spitting things in our face, he talks about hell as the third most important thing he talks about. Himself, number one, just by word count, then heaven, and in contrast to heaven, then hell. I just don't understand how Christians can dismiss Jesus so easily when he's supposed to be what it's all about. What happened to all of that? Old Testament doesn't matter. It's all about the New Testament. New Testament's all about Satan. It's all about devils. It's all about demons. It's all about unclean spirits. If we're going to believe the creator of the universe, Jesus, who is God in three persons, about salvation and his resurrection, then we also would need to believe him about Satan. And if Satan seems not to be real and isn't showing up, then I think we should add satanic hiddenness to the list of issues right up there along divine hiddenness. Satan doesn't owe us anything. If he wants to go hide, that's fine. I just think according to what the Bible has to say about him and what his plan is and how powerful and real this warfare should be, he should be a little more active. He should show up. There should be some physical proof here. So this might be just a one-off weird little video that Mindshift did that one time that doesn't make sense with the rest of the stuff. I'm fine with that. I think it's something that's very interesting to think about and a new way of coming at it, and I think that it works. That's all I have for you today. If you have other video suggestions for me and you want to get my take on it, this was just my take on what satanic hiddenness would look like. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts. Have a wonderful day, and until next time, keep thinking.